we've got our Marketer of the Year, Tom Dahl, will be here accepting the award, among others. So please do stick around for that. Let's see. Oh, and as well, you can also see the viewing of the showroom floor, which begins at 6. So that's another added incentive to stick around. So next, our last keynoter today is actually a conversation between SheBuysCars.com founder Scotty Reese and Jane Francisco, who's the editor-in-chief of Good Housekeeping, and then Nissan Future Labs executive director Rachel Wen. They'll be discussing consumer shifting media habits and how that drives trends and innovation today. So please welcome Scotty and her esteemed panel.
For joining us today. So I know the afternoon we're going to talk about multicultural consumers, which we had a great discussion with this morning from Toyota. And so we started talking about this idea of multicultural consumers and wondering, where do they get the ideas and who influences them? And research shows that the values that women bring to their purchase decisions and the ideas, the things that matter to them, also tend to resonate with multicultural consumers and also with millennials. So why don't we start off our conversation first by having Jane and Rachel introduce themselves and give you a little background. And then we're going to talk about where influence comes from and how women can better be educated and influenced in automotive. Why don't you start, Jane?
Okay, well, my name's Jane Francisco, and I'm the editor of Good Housekeeping magazine. I've been with the brand for 2 years, but Good Housekeeping has been around for 130 years. And for the last 7+ years, we have been testing cars for performance and reporting to our audience. And when I started 2 years ago, being a car enthusiast myself, I thought it would be interesting to explore the space and see if we can engage women more in this conversation. So when we do testing, obviously we're focusing on performance and a number of other factors in terms of a good fit when you're making a purchase. But we started exploring the numbers and looking at the fact that now more women have driver's licenses than men in this country, and looking at the influence numbers on purchase. And it has been, it's an ongoing exploration. I feel like it's a conversation that we would like to be having with people who are in the industry as well, in terms of how to substantially engage women in this purchase, which is one of the priciest they'll make in their lifetime. If you discount a home, which is really an investment, which you expect to get a return on, and look at building and developing both engagement and enthusiasm around this purchase and around the experience on automobiles.
Okay, my name is Rachel Wen. I'm at Nissan in our Future Lab. I've been at Nissan for 15 years, and my career at Nissan has been in advanced planning, which is to study the future and study. Up until a couple years ago, I was studying the future of our products and worked on the full lineup of Nissan Infiniti vehicles. And a lot of that work begins with consumer insight. My background is in psychology, so I'm always fascinated with consumer behavior. I have definitely seen differences in preferences across life stages, ages, generations, gender differences, so we can talk about all of that. More recently, though, the Future Lab is really about the future of mobility. So I'm working on a lot of the changes that you see in the sharing economy and car sharing, ride sharing, and beyond product, and what is the role of the OEM in that world. And actually that's when we see new kinds of enthusiasts in our industry, and I think women are going to be a big part of leading sort of that charge in new mobility options.
So no actual crystal ball.
Nowadays, we think about what future is that we want, and we drive towards that future. So that's what a lot of the tech companies are about. You have some technology and you kind of create that future. So I think that's a lot about what it is today.
So, which is a nice way to segue into the first topic of conversation, and that is how women influence these larger markets of other consumers. Do you want to start off? I know that you've done a lot of research. You both have done a lot of research. Jane just did a lot of research in retooling Good Housekeeping. What is it that you see in how women, the influence they have, and where does that come from?
Do you mean in terms of what's influencing them?
How their values and the things that they want are influencing marketplaces and other consumers. I mean, I would think it's just, my mom always did it that way, so that's how I do it, but...
Well, obviously there is influence of family, but now that technology is changing our lives and lifestyles so much, I think women are gathering information from so many sources. One of the things that we talk about is how technology, and whether it's things you can imagine for the future or things you can't yet imagine that someone's working on driving towards or driving us towards, that the technology is changing our lifestyles and allowing us as women to look past the technology itself. So I use the phone as the example, but I think it could be a car, and that is, I don't think about the technology that's driving my phone anymore. It's just a part of my life, and it has so impacted how I communicate with other people, how I gather information. Even my phone is impacting how I get from A to B, and whether that's because I'm able to interact with some rideshare program, or whether it's giving me directions, or whether it's telling me that I have a meeting in an hour and it's going to take me 25 minutes to get there. All of these things are sort of happening in the background. I think this is something that when we look at vehicles, I think the same thing is starting to happen. It's the technology is starting to weave in sort of deeply, and without our conscious participation, it is shifting our behaviors. I don't know if that really answers that question about influence, but I do think that's a...
Where do you see influence coming from?
Actually, well, I wanted to step back and say at Nissan, I have had the opportunity to work globally. So actually, what we see happening is the women's influence is emerging all over the world now. So the rising middle class in emerging markets is also includes female buyers. So some of what is influencing, some of what we think about women in the United States is taking for granted a lot of where women have come, and we see that coming up in other countries, which is really exciting. So women globally is a huge market. Then I go back to we've done studies going all the way back to the primitive days. There are some real differences between men and women. Women are fantastic multitaskers. And so the technology that's in our hands today just enables us to be incredible multitaskers. So when I worked on our minivan 5 years ago, there was an assumption that it didn't need technology, right? It didn't need all that bells and whistles. And, we just let the women in the research speak for themselves. They were already, on their iPhones, using their iPhones, incredible to help their day. Their day is hectic. They're managing a lot of schedules. If they have kids, I'm talking about women with children in this case. So the demands what we've seen is that the demands that a woman has for a vehicle, if you can meet their demands, then you've covered the whole market, basically. And one of the things too is that men tend to have what we call a sort of searchlight focus, and women have a floodlight focus. So that when they look at a vehicle, women look at a vehicle, and first they look at the entire vehicle at once, and they think about, how am I going to actually use that vehicle? What am I going to do in that vehicle? Whereas men are like, wow, look at those headlights, or look at that grill. So you just have a different perspective from a design. And so again, it's a holistic view. And if you can capture a very well-edited holistic design, interior, exterior, then you're going to achieve what women are looking for in vehicles.
And I think to Jane's point about how women will they'll research all of that information, and they tend to do that very deeply. They tend to, by the time a woman walks into a dealership, it's the dealership's sale to lose, not to sell, because she's there because she's interested and she knows a lot about it. And I think that's a nice. I love the way that you frame this, the searchlight versus the floodlight. That certainly resonates with me. But Jane, you also framed another challenge, and that is bringing women into this conversation. How do we engage women? So they're very influential. Once you've gotten their attention and their consideration, you've really covered the waterfront on a number of other consumers. So how do you get that key buyer into the conversation? How do we engage women in conversation about cars?
Well, I think one of the pieces is the fact that we're more likely to our choices are more likely to be emotionally driven. And when I say that, I don't mean to say we don't apply logic as well, but the point is that engagement is coming from an emotional place a lot of the time. So I think that makes sense, that when I look at the whole thing, how do I feel about it? And I think that when we speak to women, we talk a lot about what happens in your vehicle and the fact that how much time you spend there and how much of a part of your life and lifestyle it is. And whether it's the piece of clothing you wear literally every day, is the car that you arrive wherever you arrive in, or it's what is happening inside it and how is it accommodating your life, and whether it's kids and the ease of getting them in and out, or whether it's the comfort and the convenience that you get with it. It's really easy for me to plug in my phone to get all the things I need. Obviously, one of the things we hear, which is so cliche, but it continues to be at the top of the list, is where am I putting my handbag? I mean, it is a piece of our life. Most women have a bag with them most of the time, and then that is sort of that. Those are some of the little things that sort of play into how I feel about it.
And it's that aha moment when you get into a car and there's a natural place to put your handbag, and you feel like, this is so great. The grill and the lights and all, like that doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah. I think for me, in answering your question, it's first engaging women and understanding how they think about, their use of a vehicle and even mobility in a broader sense. So we have to understand how they think about it. And automotive manufacturers have to be better at talking to them about the right things. So again, talking to them about the specs of a vehicle is not something most women are interested in, right?
Wheelbase isn't the first thing we're looking for.
Right, exactly, right. So there is more of a practical side, and there's also, but things like how it contributes to the environment. So you do see a lot more preferences for environmentally friendly vehicles. And I think in my new area of understanding how, with electric vehicles, how it integrates into an energy management system, how it can both store your energy at home and provide for your mobility. When you start talking about how things are interrelated, I think women start to get excited because they see how things can be more efficiently used, how they can be used in multiple ways, and how they can fit into their lives in multiple ways. Those is what gets them excited.
Do you get the sense that having those kinds of conversations helps women to consider cars or brands they haven't considered before?
Yeah, I think you have to be talking about the things that they pay attention to, basically. And I think those are the areas that get them interested. So the more that we can write about those things and do those kinds of things. In my cohort of friends, I'm the go-to person on what should I buy and, what vehicles are out there for me. It's not that they don't... it's not that they're not interested and don't have an emotional attraction to vehicles. It's just not, given everything else that they pay attention to, it's not the first thing.
It's also very complicated because, by the way, There are a lot of salesmen in dealerships who don't know the details about the cars that they're selling. And a lot of women come into dealerships more knowledgeable, but still it's very confusing and there's a lot of information. So breaking that down into conversation points that all of a sudden it's just that one thing that you hear and you're all of a sudden interested. And maybe it's emotional or maybe it's lifestyle changing. Like I can charge my phone without a wire. To me, that's one of the holy grails.
No, it is amazing. I recently purchased a car that had special seats for my son, and that ended up being one of the things that I felt most excited about. And I don't know if it tipped the scale, I don't know exactly what it was, but it's you see that special thing that's going to make my life easier, he's going to like it, it's safe, all the sort of the elements. It's going to make people happier, it's going to make life easier. Finding those elements. And again, it's rarely in the sort of performance or specs sort of category.
Yeah, and maybe it's stereotypical, but like I said, women look at the car and they say, what else, what am I going to be doing with it? And a lot of it is the others. Women tend to think about the others. Who else? What are my passengers going to do? So how is my child going to get out of this vehicle? How is that going to help my life? So all of that is part of their equation when they walk into a showroom, what they're looking at. So it's really more about their needs first. But I wanted to mention too, though, that I've been reading about a cohort in the U.S. I've seen them referred to as indie women. So these are single women with high disposable income. And I think they are, in the premium world, I think they have different needs and preferences. So I think that cohort of women is, in terms of having money to spend on a vehicle, because the practical side of women sometimes takes over and, $35,000 average transaction price. Women are thinking a lot more things that they can buy with that. But if you're a high, net worth female single, you're going to buy a luxury vehicle. So I think we'll start to see their influence in the premium market.
I also think now that more and more women are earning, and that's a significant part, that the engagement in making the purchase is continues to go up. So certainly my observation in other categories is the more educated you are on any topic, usually the higher interest you end up developing. So the point is, the more women who are purchasing their own cars, the more that sort of moves into the conversation. When you get past the, where did you get your great boots? And then it's like, oh, what car are you driving? And that's a conversation that we're having between us. Yeah. And you're telling me why you love your car, what you love about it, some of the amazing elements. And then I'm hearing that and thinking, oh, that sounds great. I'm going to look into that. And whereas I think when women weren't working as much, that wasn't a conversation that was happening between them as much either.
Yeah, and women listen to other women. So, word of mouth and marketing channels that engage women with women is one of the best ways to engage them.
Well, if you want to know what the best mascara is, you ask your friend.
Yeah.
Or if you want to know who a good dentist is in your neighborhood or in your town, you ask a friend. So that's how women have been trained to get information, is to ask a friend. There was an analogy, and I can't remember which one of you said this, but it was so great, likening marketing cars to where wine was about 20 years ago. Because 20 or 30 years ago, women were not experts on wine, and now women love wine. They've become very engaged in that.
So that educational piece, it really started driving the price points up, because what used to be something I bought occasionally, I let someone else buy, or wow, this says gulpable, I'll take it. And you think, well, if you don't know the difference, why would you pay $25 per bottle of wine? Why not get the $5 or whatever? And the more you understand it, the more you develop an actual taste for it, the more the language that's spoken around it is familiar to you, then you start to care. And I think this, again, applies so much. If you're having people over for dinner and you care about their opinion and you've developed any level of knowledge in this area, you're going to want to serve a bottle of wine that you feel represents what you want them to think of you and your home and the experience and so on. And I think the more you know about cars, I remember this is years ago, and I was purchasing my first brand new car at a lot. And my sister, who's younger than me, but was more engaged in this space, said, and I was going through the price points of everything, and I was like, well, I don't know if I want to pay for the sunroof, and I'm not sure about this, and I was like, definitely not going to get alloy wheels, it's $1,000. And she was like, what? You can't drive this car and not have alloy wheels. I was like, why? Like, who cares? Like, what does that give you? And she said, that's just embarrassing. And I was like, I never crossed my mind, like, hubcaps, why not? And as soon as she had said that to me, and I started looking at cars, all of a sudden, this was a complete differentiation for me in terms of my thoughts. And then all of a sudden, I was like, oh, wow, dodged a bullet there. Like, that would have been really bad. But if that conversation hadn't come up, whether with her or whether I might have read something in an article or whatever else, I could have blissfully gone along and saved $1,000. So I think, again, there's where that sort of that education and knowledge system elevates your tastes, ultimately.
Yeah, and I mean, the more that, your publication, like Good Housekeeping, can edit all that information is fantastic. So, because, you don't have too much time, and if women have a go-to source, I think that's ideal.
So let's talk about the future.
Okay.
So, so you had talked about this micro demographic, the indies. Would you talk a little bit more about other consumer groups that you see being influential in the automotive marketplace? And also, I'd like to talk a little bit about how technology is going to change our lives.
So one of the biggest macro trends is urbanization. And this is where a lot of people talk about young people not being interested in cars anymore. And a lot of that is in other countries because there are options. There's transit, there's trains, and the economy in this country has made it difficult to own a new car for young people. But really the macro trend of urbanization, when they don't need a car. And you see in dense urban populations a lot more options for people. So you're probably asking, well, what does a car company want to do with vehicles in the city? And actually here this week we've brought a new mobility concept, and we're looking at it in the area of a sharing service, and we're demonstrating that in San Francisco right now. And so I think in terms of, and what we see is, so this vehicle actually fits between a scooter and a regular vehicle. It's smaller for city driving. And, actually the women in the research that we're getting is that women actually are more comfortable in this vehicle. It's not an open, like a scooter kind of dangerous feel. And we see them moving into this service and choosing this vehicle. So I think, how we serve the dense populated areas with more options for young people in general, not just young females, but how we think about that population is really the future, and how we serve them in a way that they have more options and could share the vehicle versus own the vehicle.
I got a chance to look at it the other day, and it I think the coolest thing about it is that unlike a bicycle or a motorcycle, you could drive this in a skirt and heels.
I have been in the back of that thing all
You will
week.
not ruin your hair.
Yeah.
If it's raining, that's okay.
Yeah.
So and I think, talking about how we connect to the idea of mobility as women, that's a solution that I could get behind. City bike, I love the idea, but only on a beautiful day when I'm dressed for casual, when I'm going someplace, maybe with my kids or my husband, but I would never use that to get to work.
Yeah. So here's another personal story. So because I work for Nissan, I'm able to drive a GTR. So that's my everyday driver, is a Nissan GTR. And, I drop my kids off at school, and, the other moms are like, what the heck are you, how did you get that? And they all want to drive it. They're in the mom mobiles. And so, is there a way that we could offer that as a shared shared mobility for people? Could they have on the weekends or the opportunity to drop their kids off in a GTR? Does it have to be that you have to own it? So I think those kinds of things. Let's not exclude women from the sports car conversation. They just don't want to have that as a daily driver, and honestly, I wouldn't either unless I worked for Nissan, but it's a fantastic feel. So I think we're thinking about, other ways to provide access to a variety of options for people.
So we were talking about the future and technology, and you had started to talk about your phone and how we connect. Based on technology and how you see your readers reacting to things, where do you see people needing information or needing resources or needing solutions?
Well, I think one of the things we talked about, and I touched on this a little bit before, was the fact that technology can make things seem more complicated, or it can simplify things. And at a certain point, it feels like technology is starting to level the playing field in terms of the conversation around vehicles. Because as much as some people may feel that the progress under the hood has been a sort of a detriment, and it's sad that it's not the authentic vehicle of the past. For women now, there's less of a disconnect if you haven't engaged in that level in terms of understanding how to do everything under the hood, for instance. So technology is allowing us all to experience the vehicle on a more sort of level field. And I think that then when you get to the part of technology making things more seamless and more woven into my life and lifestyle. And I think we are not talking about autonomous driving in this panel, but when you move towards those types of things, which may sound scary before you've tried it, and there's a whole conversation around that, but once those types of things do take place, if they do, then all of a sudden my experience in the vehicle, I'm losing the experience of driving, which I personally would miss, and it sounds like you would miss as well, but now I'm starting to focus my attention where? On my friends who are in the vehicle with me, on my kids, other things are happening. Multitasking becomes enabled to like the nth degree. Maybe I get more relaxation time. I mean, I don't know. But all of those types of pieces sort of get upped, and it allows us to experience more, I guess, in our lives.
And so the Good Housekeeping Labs, you test out a lot of products, you test out a lot of ideas, and then you deliver to your reader the things that you like the most. So give us a little insight to where you see things going in general. Do you think that we'll be, doing more at home, DIY kinds of things? Are people looking for more solutions outside? And where does technology help us with that? Like, I mean, thinking about like something like Uber delivering dinner, or
Well, I think that we're seeing in all categories two different trends happening at the same time. Almost the opposite trends. So while urbanization is happening, some people are reacting against that and moving away from being in an urban environment. And DIY is an interesting one. On one hand, we're having more things pre-done for us, sort of meal delivery. This is something you were talking about. And then there's the desire to get away from that and say, I want to make things from scratch. I want to experience it. I want, like, that whole concept of experience is something that's becoming valued. So an example I use many times, but my grandmother had 8 children, and she knit sweaters for them. And part of her process of sewing and knitting was to save money, be economical, and outfit her extremely large family. And I would say now there's for the number of years, this sort of trend of knitting has been developing. Well, now it costs more money to knit a sweater than it does to buy one at the Gap or Banana Republic or wherever. But if I knit a sweater, I get the experience. Maybe it's relaxing. I'm being creative. I'm creating something. The same could be true of a meal. And I'm doing something that's totally authentic. And if I give it to you, or if I wear it myself, I did not make this, then it's something that no one else can have. And so the idea of unique and the whole slow living movement and the local, all of those things are happening at the same time as life is getting easier, and we can get a peach from anywhere in the world within days. I mean, there's not a single, there's really hardly a food now. I've been doing this job for quite a few years, and as you can imagine, Halloween is very big in a woman's lifestyle magazine, and usually sometime around now in the next couple of months we think, oh, we need to put a pumpkin on the cover, and you can't actually get pumpkins, and if we forgot to shoot something last year in October, we have no pumpkins. Well, as of 2 years ago, no problem. We have pumpkins. Like, there's hardly anything you can't get from anywhere. And yeah, so.
I was just going to add to that. So, those sort of handcrafted cottage industries, I think, are able to survive too because of technology and because of the internet, right? So there's a website that I love, a woman started named Soko, and there's a cottage industries, women in Africa making jewelry, right, to better their lives, get themselves out of the village, provide some income. So before they were beholden to a distributor, a guy who would basically take a cut of their money, right? And so now with the internet and the phone app, they can sell their products directly to me in the United States. So I think it's amazing for me to be able to help those women, to be able to purchase beautiful jewelry that they've made. And I think those are great examples of sort of the whole system when it comes together.
Absolutely. And I think that while these trends go in opposite directions, we use this part to enable us to do this part.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the piece. Technology allows us to, or maybe every night, I'm doing whatever is the fastest, easiest, et cetera, to get food on the table or in me, so that on the weekend, I can spend time with my son, and maybe we're baking, or maybe we're doing something. Like, you're kind of shifting them off each other all the time. And again, not knitting 8 sweaters a year or whatever it is. You're doing it because you want to, and there's and all of that technology enables you to do that.
Right. It's all about, so the luxury people say is time. And so the things that are nuisances, you want technology to know what you're going to do and to do it for you, basically. So that's artificial intelligence, smart products. And there's a big part of your day that you want things just taken care of, and then the rest, then you spend on things you want to own, things you want to enjoy, things you want to do.
So one last question, and then we'll open the questions to the floor. What kinds of trends are you expecting for car interiors as our worlds become so much more cluttered and more technology and more sensory overload? What kind of things do you see will be a trend in interiors?
So I've been out of product for a couple years working on sort of new mobility services, and I've been in and out of some cars here at the show, and we certainly have not yet figured out simplification. So if we can't figure out technology and simplification, which is user interface, UX, user experience, user interface, there's a whole bunch of surface in the inside of a vehicle that you can have functional through technology nowadays. It does not need to be a dedicated button. Now, there's a lot of things about consumer behavior, and will they adapt to that, and the whole idea of safety is important. But I would predict that we're going to get a whole bunch of different user interfaces to sort of simplify that. And definitely, if it's autonomous, you're going to see different interiors because people will have the advantage to do stuff. But first and foremost is about safety when you think about autonomous, so it's not like you're going to have chairs revolving and all of that. And I think we've also kind of peaked where use of materials and all of that is better. And I think they'll keep experimenting with all kinds of material usage.
Thank you. So we'd like to open questions to the audience. Do we have questions? Come on. Right here.
Hi, Sachin Panjwani at Spark. Given, especially in the luxury market, 45 to 50% of purchases happening through an influencer, a one-on-one influencer, do you have any advice how to find these people and who are not on Twitter, but just interacting one-on-one, and how do you engage with them?
With female luxury buyers?
More so influencers, people who are advising. I mean, everyone seems to have one or two people that they go out and ask for an auto expertise advice in that sense.
Yeah, so I'm not on the marketing side, but some of what I've done in looking at the luxury market, I mean, those people make themselves known. they're usually bloggers or, I mean, I think it is through social media that those people are making themselves known. So that's how we find them. And, you know, we do a lot of different kinds of research beyond that, though, by income level, by certain cities, by demographic groups, to find people for our own vehicle designs.
So I can add a little bit to that, because She Buys Cars is written by influencers, where our content is all created by bloggers, a lot of women. We really look for people who are having experiences in cars as opposed to car experts who are telling us about all the features, because once you've been in a car and you experience the features and you ask a couple of intelligent questions, you can write a pretty good story about that. So what we find is that certainly the bloggers and influencers who are out there and active on their site or social media, they're very influential. But when it comes to luxury, it's a little bit different. A lot of manufacturers, or in any brand category, will go to the celebrities and people who are very visible. But going a level below that is coming back to word of mouth. And having that great customer experience so that women come to, when they're having coffee or, say, oh, well, you won't recognize my car in the parking lot because the Infiniti dealership dropped off a different car when they picked up my car for service today. And it's that kind of remark. And it can come from anywhere. Capturing that and sharing that in a broader base is what influencers will do, and it's finding the right people to work with you who have have the voice in the audience. But it's capturing that's where it really happens.
Yeah, I mean, I just had an amazing experience with Nordstrom where I needed to get a dress for the next day, and I looked it online, and it wasn't available in my local Nordstrom. It was next to my husband's office was one, and I literally, I could have them on this curb with the dress. He came out of his office, picked it up, brought it home. I mean, I talked about that for a week to my friends. I mean, I can't tell you, probably they're all doing it this week.
Well, I think that is actually a really good point, particularly with a female target.
Yeah.
Because women are so likely to talk about a positive experience and as likely, maybe more likely to talk about a negative experience. And that kind of sharing of information, it can last for years too. And whether it's whether it is the fact that the car company took care of me, I didn't have to go to the inconvenience when I was having it serviced or whatever the other elements are. And I do think that in terms of a purchase, knowing that you're going to get a higher level of service is something that I think is highly valued, particularly with someone who's spending a bit more money. And I think, again, it'll be remarked on. It's something that women are happy to share.
Yeah, I mean, in the automotive business, and that there's a ownership process, and so we could do a lot more to focus on that and how to help women with servicing of the vehicle and all those kind of washing, fueling, all of those kinds of things. There's a huge opportunity.
And also the club mentality. So particularly when you move into luxury, if you feel like owning a certain brand makes you feel, and whether that's how the organization treats you, it could be because my husband used to have a Land Rover. I mean, you don't drive an old Defender, and you don't drive by another Defender without someone like waving or whatever. So there's like this sort of club thing that happens, and if it's provided by the organization or if it's encouraged, again, that's something where you feel like you have that warm feeling of I'm part of something valuable to me, I think.
And going back to the technology discussion, teaching consumers how to use all the technology in their new car can take hours. And so one of the ideas that dealers are starting to adapt to is bringing the new buyer back into the dealership several times and teaching them. And how that becomes marketing is when somebody says, I just can't sync my phone to my car, it's just driving me crazy. And her friend says, oh, I'll show you how to do it. I was just at the Infiniti dealer last week and they showed me I know how to do it now. And that's where your marketing is.
We've got a question over here.
Hey, Len Bolero from AutoGuide. This discussion made me kind of think of the mini Super Bowl commercial, where all about defying labels, right? And maybe, Scotty, this is for you a little bit. How do you balance not putting a label on what women want, but giving them what they need? Because, and we run, this is not a plug or anything, but we run 600 forums about cars. 70% male, 30% female. And we see a lot of guys interested in interiors and a lot of women interested in 0 to 60. And I'm wondering, is this more generational, maybe, with the genders? Because I know a lot of younger women seem like they are different than the older women, right? But I guess, how do you balance not putting a label on women car buyers, yet kind of balancing their needs?
You address what they need. And we say, don't buy a car based on its brand, buy a car based on what you need, and evaluate the things that you need in a car and the budget that you can afford or what you want to spend, and then find a car that meets those needs. It's out there. There are so many great cars, and even really high-end features like head-up display is available on a $22,000 Mazda now. So you need to know what it is that you need. Your women who are in your forums and really interested in MPH, they will probably be in the minority. The conversations that women have about cars tend to be more about comfort and passenger space and flexibility in terms of, do the seats really fold down and do they fold flat so I can get things in the car that I need to get in there and that kind of thing. But I think women are starting to more and more think about what they really need in a car and less about what the brand says about them.
I mean, I would add, I don't think we should ever, call one vehicle. It is the kiss of death kind of to say that's a chick car. It still is, even internally, to get something going. But I think what we see changing is actually, so you never want to call one vehicle a male or a female vehicle, and it really, it's about needs. But I think what we see changing is younger men, it's okay to like something that a female likes. So I think there's change going on in both sides of that generation, right? And they grow up together as a tribe, male and female friends, right? So just because she likes it doesn't mean I can't like it. So I think you see a lot of change in the younger men coming along too.
I think on that front, again, if you look at a grade school classroom now,
Yeah.
you will see boys and girls with the same name. That's a small thing, but it's sort of a cultural indicator of the fact that gender is playing less of a role in terms of both aesthetics and sort of this cultural piece. But again, to the point of the women who are engaging in the conversations about how the car is performing and the experience of driving and so on, I think that it still comes back to that whole wine conversation and the fact that more women are, not every woman, but more women are becoming more interested as they learn more, as more women purchase, as the conversation starts to sort of, it goes beyond the handbag that I mentioned and to the experience of actually driving, because there is something pretty phenomenal about driving a car, and almost everyone, the women at the drop-off, etc., there's a little piece of you that wants to have that kind of experience, and it's sort of expanding that excitement in the marketplace as people learn more, I think.
Totally agree.
Okay, thank you, Scotty. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Rachel. Great panel, thank you. I'd like to invite our next panel to take the stage, please. This next one is about
40 minutes or so talking about here. When we looked at how to put this panel together, we knew we wanted to spend a lot of time talking about disruption in the auto industry, and that's something we're all living with day to day. As marketers, we're facing this in how we have to go to market to reach consumers to buy the cars we're selling today, but we also have to prepare and think about the future, whether that's in product or how we're going to reach consumers who are going to be hopefully buying or achieving ownership or using cars in the future. So this panel is about that disruption and how do we get from where we are today to where we're going. And we're really excited to have a great panel of guests with us today. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves so I don't butcher their titles or any of the work that they've done. Give them each about 30, 45 seconds just to talk a little bit about themselves and tell us a little bit about what they've been doing lately and why they're here today. So we can start with David.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Berkowitz, Chief Marketing Officer of MRY, and I discovered that I guess if you use the hashtag leading into the show, you get your Twitter handle on stage, so always really nice. Glad to get that distinction from our panel. And yeah, so our agency has been at the forefront of what we call the new consumer and how they're using technology and media, and we released a report a little bit back on the future of mobility and how we connect with our cars. You can see that at mry.com/auto, which will be the last plug I'll give today.
Very good. Thanks, Duncan.
Nice. My name's Duncan James. I'm the EVP, Global Head of the Cadillac account at Dentsu Aegis Network. I've been in this role for about 18 months. Prior to that, I was in the great city of Detroit for 4 years as the COO of the GM account globally. Prior to that, quite a different city, Dubai, for 5 years, still with Cara. And then before that, I was in the creative industry with WPP for about 10 years. So, yeah, a bit of a varied background, not a car guy per se, but yeah, hopefully I'll have something to say. And I've got some of my team in the audience as well, so try not to tweet.
The deck already.
So try not to tweet anything up there, like, yeah, too bad.
Great, thanks, Rachel.
I'm Rachel Pateski with Cox Automotive. I'm Associate Manager of Research. I specifically support our public relations and consumer marketing teams. I'm focused on consumer trends, so the autonomous trends are something that's near and dear to my heart. Recently, we've been working on the Gen Z automotive study with AutoTrader, as well as Kelley Blue Book's car sharing and ride sharing study. So trying to figure out how we can help our clients, manufacturers and dealers prepare for the future of automotive.
Great, thanks. And Renee.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Renee Stevens, Vice President of U.S. Auto Quality at J.D. Power, and I'm delighted to be here today. I've only been at J.D. Power for 2 years and mainly focused on quality and also on technology, so I'm really excited to see what's going on in the industry today. I've been in quality for 30 years, so actually come from the OEM side over at General Motors and had the great experience of doing a lot of work overseas and working in Korea for a number of years, and China, Middle East, Africa, and all over Asia. So it's really exciting to see the changes that are happening in the industry today. Not only how much we're going into this idea of future mobility, but also how fast the industry is changing going forward. So again, excited to be here today.
Great, great. Well, thanks you guys for being here. And I think, with this kind of representation, folks from media, folks from the agency side, folks who are talking to consumers every day from the research and insights, we should be able to get a really good set of information and an interchange about what we think is happening in this industry. I know from my own work in the field of transformation design, my team and I, we work with companies who are dealing with change and helping them figure out how to change in the fastest possible way, how to change the way in which they work to become more like tech companies, to deal with the ambiguity that is inevitable in an economy like we have today and with the trends that are happening in general culture as well. So dealing with change and that ambiguity, that's really the only thing that we know is constant, is that there is going to be more change. We're really excited about this particular topic because I think it's just at the very beginning stages, and there's a lot of things that we just don't know today that are going to become much clearer as we head toward the future. The end point is, I think, a little bit clear. You know, we have all these self-driving cars zipping around everywhere that we call up at the moment's notice on our smartphone. Maybe that's what everyone thinks, but how do we get from here to there? And how do these enormous industries that are providing jobs, that are providing new ways of getting transportation to consumers, adapt between now and then? That's what I'd like to talk a little bit about now, is how do we deal with change? And each of you in your own areas are no doubt seeing changes in your own jobs and new questions, new things you're looking at because of the arrival of autonomous technologies. Renee, can I start with you and just ask you to talk a little bit about what are some of those new topics that you're seeing people want to know about in your own research?
Yeah, great question. And, you know, one of the main questions that's on everybody's mind, and I heard it earlier today, is what does the future look like? And how fast are we going to get there? And we're seeing, I mean, if you think about it today, if you think about the road to a fully autonomous vehicle, we're already on the road. I mean, we're already seeing some of the technology today. You see it upstairs as you go around and look at the vehicles. There's a lot of semi-autonomous features today that consumers are starting to gravitate towards. And in fact, in our studies, what we find is that safety is one of the number one wants from a safety feature standpoint on their next vehicle. Over and above entertainment features, over and above other features, they want these safety features. They want blind spot monitoring and low speed collision avoidance. And now we're starting to see that on vehicles. And as consumers get more and more confident in those technologies, and we have to build that trust in the technologies, then there's this concept of gravitating more and more to fully autonomous. And even today, let's say about a quarter of the consumers say, yeah, I'm really interested in a future autonomous vehicle. However, there's still some concerns on will it work and how will it work today. But that's a lot of the studies we're doing, is really looking at, so what's the interest level for the various technologies, and how quickly are we seeing these technologies emerge, as well as what are the next trends in things like ride sharing and with Uber and Lyft. How are they going to continue to evolve going forward?
Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of conflicting research, I think, lately, too, of millennials are not interested in cars, right? The simplistic kind of view of, well, they're either interested in smartphones or cars, but not both. I mean, that's really kind of, there's much more nuanced view of the world that I think we're seeing in some of the latest research come out. And what are you seeing, Rochelle, as you talk to buyers online and seeing from kind of this huge pool of potential car owners or users coming from Auto Trader, and Kelly, that you're seeing?
So, I mean, I think the good news for all of us in automotive is that that's really a myth. The passion for cars is still very much alive with these younger generations. And just because they are the digital natives that they are, surprisingly, we talked to Gen Z recently, and a third of them said that they would give up their smartphone for a year just to own a vehicle. So they're excited about the experiences and the opportunities and the freedom that cars are going to bring them. And even when they think about autonomous, they're excited about the safety that it's going to bring to them on the road. They're the generation that's grown up with a lot of messaging around, distracted driving and the other hazards that are on the road. So those opportunities that are going to present themselves with new technologies are really exciting for them. And they're even more apt to embrace autonomous technology, both Gen Z and millennials, than the previous generations.
Yeah, and I think one of the new studies we saw lately, this actually came out from Kelly, is that there was really not this big conflict between car ownership versus the industry as it stands today. It's really going to be a lot of new types of options, a lot of new types of choices for ownership versus maybe you're just buying or leasing that you have today. And this kind of spread of the different options is going to be a huge complexity that the industry is going to have to deal with. David, as you talk to some of your clients, you talk to the CMOs that you work with, how do they deal with this kind of new options in the marketplace? How do you start to market to consumers who have a multitude of new options in front of them? How do you approach that?
Well, one of the biggest things that we've wanted to do, especially as people have known us as the youth folks, right? That MRY was Mr. Youth before, but I mean, youth is changing, and to the point where it's become far more of a mindset than an age breakdown, and so that's why one of the things that we've tried to do is discuss these attributes of the new consumer. Access over ownership is one of these prevailing traits that hasn't yet permeated over, as we just heard, into the auto industry, because also the research we did, we're actually surprised just how much that was focused in particular on millennials, but how much they really love and want to own cars. But a lot of this also is my mother, I won't share her age on stage. I'm sure she, not like she's on Twitter, but she's at the point now, she's living in an apartment in the suburbs and doesn't need to drive as much as she did. Could she be the next one to give up the second car in favor of a ride-sharing service? Quite possibly. And so these kinds of things that are very typical. Okay, these are millennial, Gen Z, urban dwellers. A lot of these that are traits that a lot of other different demographics have and permeate into different other kind of use cases. So I think a lot of it is who are the kinds of people you're trying to reach, what are the behaviors, and accepting that a lot of the behaviors transcend just a narrow bucket.
It's an interesting point. I think this idea of transportation as a commodity, something you just purchase as a utility rather than an experience of driving that you enjoy, it's probably something that's very particularly important to a luxury brand like Cadillac, I would assume, Duncan, and some of the things that you guys are working on to reposition the Cadillac brand globally and working on that intensively as you launch new vehicles. What are some of the things you think about as head of media for Cadillac and advising your clients on, for luxury and the implications of this technology for a luxury brand?
Yeah. I was listening carefully to you because I guess the question was coming to me last. I think in the future there's going to be different segments. So I might be a Luddite and I'll probably be proven wrong in 20 years, but like you were saying, I don't necessarily believe this myth that millennials don't buy cars. Like, the average age of a millennial is 24. I wasn't buying a new car at 24. I was paying off student loans and had other interests for my money. I think as they progress, I think, they will be more interested in mobility rather than buying a car. I do think that's interesting. But I think as Cadillac, we're very much putting our bet that driving is a visceral experience. Driving can be a visceral experience. Now, for some, it could be they just see it as mobility. There are people who see a car as pure functionality, and they probably buy a couple of brands that maybe not luxury brands, right? But, if you want to carry your purse around, you don't have to have a Gucci bag or a Prada bag or an LVMH bag. It's a functional thing to carry your stuff around in. And I kind of feel like the autonomous thing is we're basing everything down to everyone's going to get in a car and go from A to B seamlessly. Well, where's the emotion? Where's the feeling of luxury? Where's the status? And I think the whole luxury industry thrives on that. We thrive on because we want to seem unique. We want to either seem the same as the pack or different from the pack, depending on the brand that you're buying. Yeah. So on Cadillac, we're very much focusing on a bet. Yes, there will be EV versions of different cars, but we truly believe that the visceral feeling of driving, there will be a segment of that in the future within a broader mobility. And we'll come on to Maven a bit later with GM, but I firmly believe that the reason we buy Prada bags and Gucci shoes, that won't go away in the auto industry, I hope. Otherwise, I won't have a job in 20 years.
Well, I think that's a really important point to make, because this is for sure not a one-size-fits-all, right? There's going to be many, many options, some of which we probably can't even envision today, and that are going to come from the beta testing and the experiments that are happening more and more. In fact, a lot of these companies are kind of experimenting in public, right? We're now in this beta culture, which is something that the OEM industry hasn't typically wanted to be part of much. You want to, I know from my time working at a car company, and most recently my role as a CMO at Jaguar, you want to project a confident image. You want to project that you know what you're doing out there. When you're beta testing, you're putting things out in the market that you're not sure of. So getting comfortable with that ambiguity and that fact that you might fail and you might have to do it publicly. How do you think consumers will react to that? And maybe, Renee, I can ask you to talk a little bit about what you see from consumers in terms of their willingness to understand that kind of test culture.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I mean, I think the most recent example was, Google's probably the best example of the company that's testing in public, and, when the Google car just recently crashed into the bus, everybody, oh my gosh, freaked out, it's on YouTube all over the place, and it becomes a real public event. But that's okay. I mean, that's something people look at and say, okay, yeah, there's still some bugs in the technology, but companies have to get more and more used to that. And I think the interesting test will be as we get companies like Ford, who has one of the biggest mobility fleets they're putting on the roads now, and even companies like GM, like Hyundai, and Toyota, who also has some vehicles on the road. Almost every manufacturer has vehicles on the road, and as people start to see what's happening, and there's going to be times when the technology will fail. That's why it's a test. I think the public will get more and more used to that. And if you think of today, a lot of the technology we receive is a beta mode, is a test. And many of particularly our younger buyers and younger consumers are actually used to that. And they really like to be in the testing environment because they feel then they're part of the solution. And so we're finding that's becoming more and more acceptable.
Yeah. I talked to a lot of clients about the idea of a minimum viable product, right? And the idea that get something that you can get out into the market, get fast reaction from. It doesn't have to be the final thing because it's going to change, but you send it out there, you get fast iteration, and then you get the new version out. And as long as you set up the right expectations and have a minimum standard, safety in the car industry, for sure, a minimum standard level, so you got to negotiate that. But I think that can become part of how a company defines its culture, defines how it works, and then can bring those new features and that fast learning back in. What do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for that authenticity that comes out of failing in public, and consumers and younger consumers in particular tend to embrace that. But I think there also needs to be this appreciation for the position that the auto manufacturers and others in the chain are in, right? Because if your Prada bag fails in public, then like your lipstick falls out of your purse, right? If your smart fridge gets hacked, then maybe someone orders you 20 gallons of milk that you didn't want. And so this, like you try to change a setting on the light and it blinds someone, then this becomes a really, really big deal. So the stakes are a lot higher, and I think it's just all the more impressive seeing the amount of innovation coming out of the automotive space. I mean, like at CES this year, the Consumer Electronics Show, all the most interesting stories were around the car brands and who they're partnering with and what they're doing. And this is something that, like, it's been gearing up to that point, so it's not a total surprise, but the amount that just took over and dominated the conversation around technology is fascinating, especially since there is such high risk involved.
Yeah, just bouncing a little bit more off that concept of risk with companies. And so there is a lot of risk. I mean, we saw companies like Ford, they started off with My Ford Touch, and they were probably one of the first in the industry with this entertainment system. And they did suffer with it. When we hear the consumer feedback, it didn't work, it was slow, it had some problems, it was confusing, but now they've taken all that insight and that input from the consumer, and their next gen products are really, really good. In fact, they were one of the most improved brands when we looked at the infotainment area coming up. But there's a risk with that, but I think more and more companies are recognizing that, hey, they have to take those steps, and it's not always going to be easy. Sometimes it will be painful.
Well, and Renee, I think you bring up a great point about My Ford Touch, is the fact that consumers are not expecting automakers to shoulder all of this autonomous technology by themselves. They're expecting partnerships. They're okay with who's going to partner with them. And so they can move more fast, be more agile in how they develop these products if they're partnering with other companies. And we just saw today in the Wall Street Journal that there's even more announcements about auto manufacturers that are looking into acquiring and partnering with more autonomous technology companies.
Exactly. They recognize that they don't have the development cycle that can move as fast as a technology company. And secondly, it's just that skill set, having that particular skill set to be able to bring those technologies to life is, you have to partner. You also have to be a little more open in your codes and, where you have code opened. So, there's a lot involved in that, and it's really exciting to see the partnerships that are going on in the industry.
So you see brands like Google coming in with Android Auto availability cards, CarPlay from Apple, obviously two very important brands, making their way into the car industry. Open arms, cautious open arms from the car makers for these technologies, driven by consumer demand and need for connectivity in their cars, and to do it in the safest, best quality way, blending these expertise of these companies. What do you see as some of the challenges for that, for consumers, for OEMs and marketers? How do you talk about some of those partnerships in the way that helps you position your cars and still control your brand? I'll open this to anyone.
I'll take it, I guess. So I think OEMs have had to have a sea change in the last 5 years of how they work and the culture within an OEM. And I think one of the biggest things for any business nowadays is really finding out, when do you build, when do you borrow, and when do you partner? And I think OEMs traditionally have built. They had all the expertise in-house, end-to-end, own it, testing, take it to market. And I think we've seen that. I mean, my Ford Touch was great to market. We've seen every brand has a variation on that. And I frankly don't think any brand has nailed it. Obviously, Q with Cadillac is fantastic. But even with the new Cadillac's second plug, CT6, for example, that just launched, it has Apple CarPlay. And that's an example where Cadillac or GM and Cadillac have gone to an external supplier and said, look, we need to borrow this. We need to put it in there. It's cheaper, it's quicker, the testing's already done, but most importantly, the consumer wants it. Mm-hmm. And I think the risk for consumers then comes down because they start seeing the brand Apple. And there's a massive amount of trust in the interface, consumer experience. The risk for the OEM goes down. They're not having to build something from scratch. And I think, at lunch, someone made a great comment. Software engineers aren't necessarily going to go and work for an OEM over working for Google in Silicon Valley. So you're maybe going to get good talent, but are you getting the best talent?
Right.
And if you're buying a $20, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70,000 car, frankly, you expect the interface to be as good as the $500 thing in your pocket, right? And often it isn't. So I think a really big decision, and the big issue for the OEMs is not necessarily a supply chain, it's not a contract thing, it's a cultural thing. It's how do you bring people into your previously closed system and have them operate within your company culture, within your processes. Because I can tell you, having worked a bit with Google and with GM, rightly or wrongly, they're very different cultures in how they approach a problem. And I think if you can just be open to adopting someone else's culture, they're going to go a very long way. But it's risky. Culture's a very tough thing to do.
Yeah, nearly a decade ago, I was at a CES event and wound up just being at some blogger event of all things where the leadership of Ford was in the room, and so I met with the then CEO Alan Mulally, and he started talking about the car as a social network, right? And it's connecting people, just as the whole idea of social networks was really permeating our consciousness. And then the president, who then rose to the top rank, Mark Field, he started talking about the car tapping into all these APIs and building on things, and it was this fascinating moment in time because you see now clearly they're not going to change that overnight, but they were one of the first to do so, and this whole idea that it really was no longer a conversation about that very functional aspect of transportation that you're talking about, but connecting people, they're built on services, the role of the car in your life, it's so much, it is something very important to your family. It's how if you're not the driver, you're spending a lot of your leisure time, and so all of this, they started getting it, and now just a few years later, in a really short amount of time, seeing the fruits of it.
And this change that we're talking about, every OEM has either a group or a significant area of research, beta tests, other things going on with it. There's very different approaches in how they're actually testing these things, where these functions sit in different organizations, which I find interesting too. Some are located in their Silicon Valley research areas and, versus in their headquarters groups. Some are spinning off companies, like Ford spinning off and starting smart mobility. GM, with their investments, has Maven, the seed of idea in these areas. I think there seems to be like a lot of testing even in the approach to this kind of innovation, because there's a big organization, there's a big corporation to continue to run. There's factories to run, there's cars to sell in the meantime. So have you seen anything that's particularly interesting as you look at the industry over the last couple months that shows a good model or some real advancements in the approach to this innovation? Renee?
Yeah, I'll just mention one that I thought was fairly impressive. Thinking about the whole Shark Tank environment, and at GM they actually started a process, and some of you might have seen it recently in automotive news, where they actually have a Shark Tank, and so they go out and they have a panel of their leaders, and they invite their PhDs or research fellows to come in and actually pitch a product, and they go and fund that. They put money behind that, and the person that wins that project, that Shark Tank, they're an entrepreneur. They go out and they go on project. They actually go on a venture project, and it's totally funded by GM. And I think that whole culture on really moving fast and bringing out those great ideas and putting the money behind it, I think is just awesome.
I mean, we've got to also remember to defend, a lot of people criticize the OEMs, okay, and they're an easy target, right? They are an easy target. I don't have facts for 2015 but for 2014, I remember early 2015 putting a presentation together, and we had to make a certain point. And one of the things that the GM marketing team didn't know this, but I was hanging out with the engineers, finding out what was going on, blah, blah, blah. And in 2014, GM had twice the number of new technology patents than Facebook and Google put together. And we kind of forget that we see them as these sort of like dusty, often, men in a corner as a manufacturing company. But these guys are changing very, very quickly for them. But the interesting thing is the scale that they're changing. It's a supertanker and it's changing. But when you actually do change that supertanker, there's a massive amount of momentum. And I think Maven is, and I'm only talking about it because I know it best, is a great example. GM got a lot of publicity for partnering with Lyft and a ride-sharing program. That's actually a very small part of Maven, which is a mobility program. And I think to our millennial point earlier, are millennials able, due to their financial structure, cost of education, so on and so forth, to go out and buy a car as early as previous generations? Maybe not. But if you look at mobility, are they as willing to pay X amount of dollars per month to have a mobility option open to them? That might be a car for 2 days a week. It might be a car at the weekends. It might be a car 1 week and then Escalade for the Hamptons the next week. And that comes with a premium, a monthly premium. So I think where the OEMs also really need to open up, not just the Shark Tank technology ideas, but also what are the financial models that we can change, or ownership models, beyond the $399 lease or the 0% APR and writing a big check for 70 grand for a car. I think that the OEMs really are starting to think we need to gain a revenue stream from a different way and have more flexible access to our cars, whether it's ride sharing, car renting, ownership models where you have different access to different cars at different times, almost like a car club.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting. I mean, even for me as a consumer, I love cars, and I've traditionally bought cars. That's exciting to me. Paying the same amount, but having an Escalade for the Hamptons and an ATS to go to work, that's cool,
Yeah. Real innovation and experience. What do you think, Rochelle?
I mean, I think also speaking to that, when you start testing out new technologies with the manufacturers, or I mean, even inside in Cox Automotive, we have a company called FlexDrive that has a similar partnership, but with Uber. It's allowing consumers to have access to cars and start building relationships with brands when they may not have the access to the finances that they would to outright buy the car. So similar to the way that we see that certified pre-owned is the gateway to getting someone who can't necessarily afford that new car, but they can get the used car, we're seeing the same thing with alternative forms of ownership, is that you're able to get in the car and then ultimately you can own it a couple years down the road once you've established that relationship and learned to love that brand.
I think one of the things that's interesting to look at too is it's often more difficult to adapt and change your existing big business that has its own dynamics, its own culture, its own revenue requirements and employees than it is sometimes to start something from scratch too, when you're only focused on doing one thing. So I think this scene where we're looking at new entries like Tesla for sure has scoped out an interesting market. Other potential entries like Apple and Google. There's no doubt a lot of others who we know working on different things that aren't yet announced. How do you think consumers will be open to new kinds of brands or new providers of these kinds of transportation services? Anything you're seeing in your research right now?
Yeah, as far as brands go, I think consumers are fairly open. They want the experience, and they do trust. Obviously, they have a lot of time invested and in the traditional OEMs. So there's a lot of trust in the traditional OEMs, but there's also a lot of experience and trust with the technology companies as well. But I think there's still questions out there. As you look at Google has a pretty good financial record on working in a technology area when you don't have a very capital-intensive business per se. If they go to actually try to build a vehicle themselves, will their financials and will their shareholders, go for the kind of the change in their financial model? But will that be acceptable to consumers? I think that's kind of an open question. But there's a lot of trust, I would say, in their technologies, but also with the existing OEMs as well.
And that's something that's really going to be challenging for anyone that wants to enter the marketplace. We hear a lot about Tesla, but when we look at vehicle sales, they're still a very, very small piece of the pie. They're just getting a large share of voice and making waves with everyone in the news. It's the trusted, tried and true brands that are able to go out there and kind of risk because they have the assets and they have the cash flow to make those investments. Anyone who's new to the marketplace is going to have to spend quite a bit to build up the brand equity, to have the awareness among consumers in order to gain their followers and get them to trust to get behind the wheel, especially when we're talking about autonomous cars and semi-autonomous cars. Trust is such a barrier to getting into it that if you already have a relationship with some of the traditional brands, you're more likely to let go of the driver wheel.
Yeah, it still needs a steering wheel, at least now.
For now.
There's still some question on that. It still needs to have mechanical parts to go. So, there's still areas where your traditional OEMs do have the experience, but it's bringing that together. I think that's the excitement to move forward. But I think the bigger question is around the dealers. What will be the dealer's experience and the expectations on how these vehicles are delivered going forward, and that will maybe where there's even a little bit more changes going forward. Not that I see that traditional dealers are going away, but the way they do business and their business model will definitely need to change around the fact of, particularly with all the new technology coming in.
And also, if you look at the arms race going on, I'm sure as we see what are the hot things coming out of this auto show, overwhelmingly, it's going to be far more similar than different, right? So many things are going in the same direction. So we'll see everyone and their mothers coming out with what they're doing in terms of automation, and every single one talking about the latest environmentally sound feature. And so, which model wins as far as what's going to be the cleanest car overall? we'll see. But these things are all going in the same direction. And then meanwhile, what Tesla popularized that odds are is going to be far more commonplace are these over-the-air updates that then change the functionality of the car. So not just the interface of a dashboard, or if it adds Foursquare to the Yelp button that's already on it, but things that change how the machine learning capabilities of the car and objects it can recognize and entire features of it. But those with more cars out there have the opportunity to scale that faster, to iterate faster, learn from all the data that's coming back to them, and so the competitive advantage for that first mover also narrows over time, just because there's been a long runway for the big players to really catch up.
Yeah, and I think that over-the-air updates and having cars that are always with the latest version, is going to be an expectation. Certainly could become part of a mandate by the government too, is that capability is part of new cars coming up at some point. We didn't talk a lot about government interplay here, but it's certainly a huge unknown factor in this whole world we're talking about is the regulation, the need for consistent regulations that makers can develop to and people can develop markets around and invest in. There's also the factor of we're going to have an election, coming up too, and who knows what that will really mean for some of the investments and policies here. So I think all of these things together, the macro trends, the political sphere, the economic sphere, we're sort of at peak auto maybe right now, where the good times are rolling. That enables a lot of this future-oriented look and investment in the future. But how will that start to feel in a couple of years' time when things maybe are a little bit tighter? So all of these things are what makes this probably, from my perspective, one of the most interesting industries to be looking at and working with right now. And I really appreciate the panel's time here. I think we may have some time for a couple questions. Ross?
Well, unfortunately, in the interest of getting back on schedule, we have to
no
not
questions.
do questions. But
So
if
we
you, have
got
questions, if you have questions for the panel, hopefully you'll stick around for the coffee break, and you can ask it to them then. We'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll resume. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
panel.
Cheers, thank you.
It's great. Thank you.